The war in Ukraine has changed the world. And now we need to think about where this world is moving to, together. That's why MIM Business School is launching the nationwide educational project ReinforceUA, where the world's greatest minds will share their ideas and insights. And you will get their experience, change your perspective, and discover what changes should the business be ready for, before and after the victory. Every week on ReinforceUA.com.
Dear colleague, friends in Ukraine and all over the world, I'm Vyacheslav Pokatillo, and on behalf of MIM Kyiv Business School, welcome you on ReinforceUA project. This project was designed to intellectually support and inspire Ukrainian business community in these difficult times. And we intended to widen discussion about the present and the future of Ukraine and Ukrainian business. In this respect, we invited the world-famous intellectuals to share their views on most demanding problem the humanity is facing right now. The project was made possible due to the support of Bogdan Havrilishin Foundation, 50 Thinkers Organization, and 3 global associations of business education, ASCSB, AMBA, and AFMD. We are grateful to all donations you have made while registering on their platform, and please be aware that all donations can be done in any time further. And the funds raised will be directed to support of temporarily displaced Ukrainian women who would like to start their own businesses. Before I shall give the floor to our honorable guest today, I'd like to remind you that we are online. Our lecture, our event today will be recorded, and the record will be available further on. You may be able to ask questions, and in this respect, please use Q&A button rather than chat. And now I am honored to introduce you Dr. Sanyin Siang. Dr. Siang is she works like lead Duke's University Coach and Leader Cybernetics Center, and help leaders all over the world to build superpower teams to get the next level of endurance and success. With more than 1 million followers on LinkedIn, Professor Siang is well known and widely comments in such platforms like New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Forbes, and all other famous sites. She writes the last word column for Dialogue Revenues, and today she is with us. And I'm honored to give you the floor.
Thank you so much. It's an honor, and I'm humbled to be here and to be able to share some of the ideas and thoughts that I have been working on. I thought instead of a traditional keynote, I like to do what's a heart note, which is imagine if you were coming into my office and we were just having coffee and having a chat, and we're just sharing ideas. So I love to hear your questions. I love to hear your feedback and your thoughts. So today I thought I'd talk about this idea around belonging. Belonging is something I've been working on for a long time. How do we create that sense of belonging for our teams? How do we create that sense of belonging for ourselves? And I think I'll take you to the origin story of belonging, why this is such an important topic for me, and then how it relates to superpowers and teams. So when I was age 7, I immigrated from Taiwan to the United States. And as an immigrant, we'll quickly discover that you're always in a psychological no man's place. What that means is you're never fully a member, again, of the community that you've left, and you're also never really feel fully a member of the community that you are entering into. And so survival in this psychological no man's space, this in-between space as an immigrant, means that we have to get to understand every single person's points of view and be able to be that bridge. But I've always felt like an outsider. And so I started becoming interested in the idea of belonging and how we create a sense of belonging for ourselves and for others around us. And in my work, not only do I work with executives and CEOs, but I also work with college students here at Duke University. And over the years, I've had the privilege of working also with first generation college students. These are the first in their families to come to college and get a university degree. And I discovered that there's also the sense of being an immigrant in that context as well. So as I explored this idea of how to create a sense of belonging, one of the things I've discovered is this is actually the default for what most people are feeling. There's two things. One is this is the default for what most people are feeling. So even if someone has been with an organization for 20 years, and we assume, of course, they feel they belong, that may not necessarily be the case. Or one may work with a CEO and you think, oh, the CEO is in the highest, position in the organization. Of course, they feel they belong. Being a CEO can actually be a very lonely position, right? So there's always this sense of, I think we all default not to a sense of belonging. We actually default to a sense of feeling like an outsider or feeling like we don't belong. So what this means, this particular insight means, is that as leaders of our organization with the positional power to affect belonging, if we assume that people in our organizations don't feel they belong, then we have to intentionally work harder to craft messages, to craft actions, to craft values in a way that everyone in our organization feel, believe, and know that they belong, because that is also part of the social contract today, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So that's the first insight, is people's default is actually a sense of being an outsider. If I were going to do a quick hand raise of everyone here, is have you ever felt like you don't belong in your organization? I think a lot of people would raise their hands. The second insight is simply this, that we don't, as an immigrant, I thought, all right, the sense of belonging, we think about belonging to a place, like I'm from Taiwan, therefore it's, that's where the identity is. I'm now an American citizen. I've been in the United States for 40 years. Now that is also a sense of place. People think about belonging to companies. People think about belonging to family units. This idea of belonging transcends place and space. We can actually belong to a shared purpose, to a shared sense of shared values, to a shared belief, to a shared mission. And so if we connect the dots between what leaders have to do today in creating a sense of belonging, we can also connect it to this idea of, let's create, especially when organizations are now scattered across the globe, we have multinational global organizations. How can we create that sense of belonging beyond the space and the place, but also to values, to mission, to what we're trying to do here? So that's a second insight. And then the third insight is this idea that belonging starts with us, right? So we may not feel like we belong, but if we're a leader in a place of positional power, then we can affect that sense of belonging because we can empathize with that sense of outsiderness. But if we start with creating a sense of belonging for ourselves, then we can start pulling others into the space that we're in. And so belonging really starts with us. So I want to connect this idea of belonging to why does it matter for leadership today? Well, the last 2 to 3 years have been very hard on the world, and we are still going through many challenges. But in the last, I would say even beyond the last 3 years, there's been an positional shift in power. So before, the power resided in institutions and in organizations rather than individuals. What I mean by that is if you are a company and our parents, for example, our parents will work for companies and they will work for the company as long as the company chooses to have them work there. Today, the power has shifted to the individual. So the individual will work there as long as the individual chooses to work there. I mean, that's the talent wars that we're dealing with across the globe today. So when I think about that, there's a shift in the social contract between employer and employees. Employees are demanding more humanity from their leaders, from their organizations. Employees are also, they have a choice to stay or to leave. And so therefore they have more power. And with that power comes also the sense of expectation around an organization where they feel like they really belong, where there's a mission and there's a purpose that they can really believe in and get behind. And so connecting this with the idea of how leaders, what leaders, this new social contract, what leaders need to do to create that sense of belonging is doubling down on articulating. If you're an entrepreneur, for example, think about the mission and the vision of your company, this beyond what the product or services that you're creating, but what is the societal good? What is the societal stewardship for that, for those products and services? Because that's what our employees want to feel that sense of connection to, right? Even more so, it also means being able to see in a different way. And this is where superpowers comes in. So I want to share just a couple of stories, and then I'll just open it up for question and answering. So part of a sense of belonging means being able to see ourselves and our contributions to the organization or to whatever the society that we're in. Oftentimes we have a hard time seeing ourselves. This is why I have a job as an executive coach or as an educator, is because we have a hard time seeing ourselves. We need others to help us see ourselves a little bit more clearly. In my executive coaching, working with CEOs and across different sectors and industries, and even high achieving students in universities, what I've come to find is one of our biggest blind spots in how we see ourselves is we fail to see the things in ourselves that make us extraordinary. Now, when you think about it, what's extraordinary about you to the rest of us? It's just your everyday normal. So you tend to walk around thinking, oh, you have this incredible capabilities, incredible ways of connecting people. And you think that's just normal because it comes easily to you. And we tend to discount what comes easily to us. So instead, we walk around not knowing what our superpowers are and what our unique and innate and instinctive contributions to the world is. But if we know that, that gives us a sense of security and understanding how we can help the world, how we can use our gifts, because we start seeing our superpowers as gifts and not take them for granted. So connecting that with this idea of belonging starts with you. When you understand what your superpowers are, you can actually create that sense of belonging for yourself and bring other people into your space and create a sense of belonging for them too. The other thing is we need a way of seeing other people in new lights, maybe beyond what society currently has the capability of recognizing. So if we were going to pause and say, right now, organizations, what's being recognized as valuable in terms of gifts or in terms of superpowers, a lot of times those are the productivity type of gifts or the intellectual gifts. But then if the team nowadays, and we're entering the world where the team is really the atomic unit of success in any organization. It's a team that can give us a greater sense of resilience. I mean, we all felt that. It's community and team that's resilient, then we need ways of seeing the type of superpowers that affect positively those type of that resiliency and that type of teaming and cohering. And so when's the last time, when we think about it, that we promoted someone because they are the emotional glue for our organizations, that they're the ones who are able to make people, when they're on our teams, people with those emotional glue superpowers, we feel more tightly, we just feel like we're more of a team together. There's more chemistry on the team. When's the last time we promoted someone because they have great wisdom? Wisdom is a superpower, and yet it's not something that is yet recognized or explicitly recognized in organizations. So there's all these superpowers, and we need also new ways, not only of seeing ourselves, but we also need new ways of seeing each other. And when we're able to see each other and recognize and call out each other's unique and innate and instinctive gifts, that creates a sense of security. And that also helps people understand how they can contribute to the team, right? And that gives also a sense of belonging for them. And I want to close this off with this idea of how we often miss out on seeing each other beyond the constructs of what the organization or society deems them, or the roles that we put them in. So here's 3 stories, which are among my favorites. And by the way, before going into these 3 stories, at the end of the day, if we're trying to encapsulate it, the US Secretary of Defense, General Lloyd Austin, once asked, are you trying to build an all-star team, or you're trying to build a championship team? Those are 2 different things when you think about it. We think we need an all-star team to build a championship team. At the end of the day, what we want is that championship team. And we need to be able to see the full range of what someone has to offer to be able, because then we can build a unique, inimitable collection of superpowers that lead to that championship team. So here's 3 stories to illustrate that point. So the first story is I work at the Duke University. I lead the Coach K Leadership and Ethics Center. So for those of you who don't know who Coach K is, he is Mike Krzyzewski, and for many years, he was the head coach for the Duke men's team and took us to national championships. He is also for 3 Olympics, the head coach for the USA men's Olympic team, and took us through for 12 years to 3 gold medals, 1 per year, 1 for each Olympic between 2008 and 2012 and 2016 for our Olympic teams. And so he is an extraordinary team builder, and he's someone who's able to see people. He's an extraordinary team builder because he's able to bring people together and give them a sense of purpose and place and belonging. And he's also able to see them beyond what the role might, beyond their current roles. So one year he had said, we had not done well as a basketball team. And in his analysis at the end of that year, he said, well, I think one of the reasons why we didn't do well is because DC Williams passed away. Now, if you're wondering who DC Williams was, we were all wondering the same thing. He wasn't one of the basketball players. He wasn't one of the athletic directors. We're wondering, who is DC Williams? And Coach went on to talk about it. He said, well, DC Williams was the custodian who cleaned the floors for our basketball court in Cameron Indoor Stadium. And he also cleaned the locker rooms. But beyond being a custodian, Coach K would say he is also very wise. And he's someone who understands and feels the emotions of those around him. So what he and Coach K would talk about was DC would say, today the players, they left the locker room in a mess. Something's going wrong. Or they left the locker room meticulous. things are going right. Or coach, you might want to talk to these two players because I think they're emotionally, they might not be in the place they need to be. So coach was listening to the counsel of Coach K was listening to the counsel of this remarkable custodian named DC Williams, because he saw DC beyond someone who cleaned the floors. He saw DC Williams for DC's superpowers of being able to capture the emotional, understand the emotional pulse of the team. So that's the first story. So how often when we look at our teammates, do we see them beyond the roles that they play? What other insights and superpowers do they have to offer that they may not even realize or know about? So then the second story is the one of pit crew. So pit crew in the United States, when there's racing cars in NASCAR, the cars, after they run several laps, they have to stop at the pit crew and have all their tires changed out. That's what pit crew is. And in pit crew, it's all about how fast the crew can change out the tires, because every second counts when you're in a race. So 20 some years ago at our business school at Duke University, when the students first come onto campus, we would run them through a pit crew exercise where the students play pit crew teams, and they are there and they're changing out the tires. And the goal is to try to change out those tires as fast as possible. And what was interesting was during the end, one of the facilitators asked the students, "Did any one of you ask the driver?" No one asked the driver. Did any one of you ask the driver what you could have done better? What could have been made more efficient? Because the driver has done this so many times. Now, the driver may not have offered because he or she may not realize they have that knowledge. But it just takes the asking, "Hey, you've seen this many times. What could we do better?" And that question, being able to ask that question of someone beyond the outside of the role that they're in, that may open up so many different answers and possibilities and insights, and may perhaps give us lessons that can help us achieve what we want to achieve a lot faster. But how often do we pause and we ask, "Hey, what do you think? From where you sit, you've seen this many times. What can we do better?" You're getting data. Data is invaluable. Right? And then the third story was one I recently saw, and it was with the Baltimore Museum of Art. And it was an exhibit in which they asked the security guards in the museum to curate the paintings and put them together in different rooms in different places. And I thought that was just incredible, because it helps us see the guards in a new light beyond their roles. And I, for one, whenever I talk to a security guard at a museum, it's always asking, "Where's the bathroom? Where's that painting? Oh, am I allowed to take pictures here?" I've never thought to ask a security guard who has been looking at those paintings for every day, for a number of hours, for perhaps years, to say, "What do you think of this painting? What have you noticed about this painting? What have you noticed other people saying about this painting?" And I love what the Baltimore Museum of Art did, because they helped those guards. They draw on insights from those guards and gave them a voice and a platform to share their knowledge and what they know. And I thought that was what would happen if we do more of that in our organizations. It's a way of seeing people, really seeing them beyond the role, right? And it's seeing them, it's taking the time to know them and really connecting the dots. And it's being curious and wondering, "Hey, what else might you know? And I know you have incredible superpowers and insights. How can we discover what those are?" Because in a world where there's a lot of uncertainties, and there's no set playbooks anymore, the playbooks by our predecessors may no longer apply. We need innovative ways, innovative contributions. And it starts by seeing each other differently and being able to, how do we unleash and discover the full range of capabilities that person might bring, or one of our teammates might bring? How do we unleash the full range of capabilities that we ourselves may not know about, but we can bring to the table if only we can ask and we can see. And when we see each other and when we see ourselves, that's how we create that sense of belonging, right? And then together we can create that shared sense of purpose and that shared sense of mission. And that's what my work on belonging and purpose and superpowers is all about. And at this point, I'll just pause and let's engage in the dialogue for questions, comments, reactions. I'd love to hear from you.
Thank you very much. We have a couple of questions, but would you mind? I would build our discussion or this part of event around 3 words: around the company, team, and personality, an individual. Let's start with company. It sounds easy because we are in a business and business school, and we also consult a lot of businesses when speaking about leadership. There's also very often about business rather than politics, and according to at the moment trust, at the moment people trust more businesses than politicians, etc., etc. So company plays important role in society at the moment, and your very powerful idea about belonging via mission also very much complies with this current discussion about what business is for. I have a simple question. Whom belongs business, company?
I like to think, when we build something, we never build it alone. It's always with others. So, I know one of the big words right now is stakeholders instead of shareholders, right? So who does a business belong to? I think it belongs with the people who help build it, who have whatever that investment is, whether it's intellectual capital, financial capital, social capital, reputational capital. No business is built alone, right? And so it has to be responsive to all the different people who help bring it. Now, whether those people may have an actual formal ownership stake, that's not my definition of who it belongs to, right? It really belongs to customers. It belongs to the employees. It belongs to the shareholders. And before, things can be more siloed, where if you're the leader in an organization, you have the luxury of only focusing on the success of your organization. But in today's world, when we see the effects of one action at this point affects another action here, affects another action here, we're so interdependent that it's no longer a luxury for it's being a societal steward. Being a societal steward is part of wearing the leadership mantle, right? So that's one. And then two, so as leaders, we have to think not only for our organization, but we also have to think about our organization in context of the society in which we engage in, because that society is critical for the success of our business, and we have a responsibility as societal stewards. And then the other example I would draw from is I work a lot with sports teams. And in sports teams, when we think about it, yes, there's owners of a sports team, but every sports franchise is in essence a community-owned franchise. The community around that sports, the fan base, they make the sports franchise, the sports club, what it is. And so in that metaphorical sense, when you say, who does the business belong to? It belongs to the employees, it belongs to, the customers. It's an adaptive co-shaping.
a few examples from the American, let's say, headlines. In Florida, the governor forbade let's say, any reasons for the company, for pension funds, state pension funds, as far as I assume, to exist, any other reasons than profit. So, which means, you know, there are strong among stakeholders. There is and other headlines like woke capitalism, etc. You should have seen them. There is a strong pressure at the moment from a standard, let's say, capitalistic approach. The company belongs to shareholders, and the only reasons for company to exist to make profit. From the other side, I fully with you, with your understanding the company, but without purpose, without let's say uniting stakeholders, doesn't look very viable. But this is the current situation in the US. This discussion is quite hot. Another example from very liberal state, contrary to Florida, about California, and the decision that McDonald's and other big network restaurants should be regulated about paying salaries to their employees, and which was not very welcomed by let's say shareholders and leaders, also managers of the company, despite. And I also fully with you that at the moment, people, employees seem to have rights to work or not to work, which means their power in defining their attitude to the company raised. So, but practically, it's not. So this doesn't look very promising.
These are very challenging times for business leaders. And we actually at the business school have a project called the Dialogue Project, which is looking at how business, because of, as you had said earlier in your introduction, business right now has more of the public's trust than politicians, right? So how do business leaders use that trust to be able to bridge rather than to be able to bridge in a world that seems to become more and more divided than ever. And so we are exploring that issue in the Dialogue Project. I can put that in the chat, the link. But these are issues our predecessors never had to deal with. 20 years ago, the CEO of a company is never asked to speak on a political issue, right? And now today, if they don't speak, that silence is taken as a statement in itself. And so these are really challenging times, and it's not going to be solved right in the instant, but it requires a lot of conversation and discussion and really understanding, one, what is our mission, what is our reason for existence, and who we are and what we stand for. And when do we speak? When do we not speak? When does it make sense? When is it? Because there are times when one can speak as a leader and comes off as hollow, because there's not a tradition or a set of, foundation behind that statement. And so these are really challenging questions that leaders are wrestling with today. But I think one of the things to look at is, in any business, in any organization, we have to balance the long term with the short term. What's required in the short term, but then also, if we think about the consequences of an action today, or the cascading effects of that long term, and having a sense of who we want to be and what we want to be in the long term and what we stand for. I think it's really important, that sense of purpose.
Thank you. And we have a question about, let's say, in the big companies, we still with companies rather than smaller teams. What kind of tools, what kind of frameworks, what kind of instruments you may recommend for big companies to establish this, let's say, culture or approach of getting people involved, and actually to see those elements. We'll come to this about superpower and how to call it. You say it better. I wouldn't find a proper word.
Superpowers and unique gifts.
So, what are recommended tools and approaches? Let's say so instruments, like in a business school. What can we teach? What can we actually advise leaders, company leaders to do?
All right. So now we're talking about companies with 50,000 people, and you are the chief executive or you're a member of the C-suite. Right. So there's several different best practices that I've come across in my work with CEOs. So one, first and foremost, it starts with your relationship with those around you. Right. So if you can create that sense of belonging, like just asking, so here's one tool that I use, a superpowers exercise, where I would get a executive leadership team together and they have to go around and tell each other what each other's superpowers are. That's a way of every person on that team being seen, but it's also a very thoughtful response on the part of his or her teammates to say what that person's superpowers are. So that's one. But no matter where you start immediately with those around you, right? So, and you think about if you're at the C-suite level, it cascades the effects of that sense of security. It actually cascades down throughout the organization. There is that powerful effect. But then the second thing I've seen is how do you create that touch point with members throughout your 50,000 plus employee base? So Tarang Ameng, who is the CEO of Elf Cosmetics, one thing he would do is, since the start of the pandemic, Tarang is a gifted writer. He would write every week, write like a short email that would go out to all the employees. And it's his reflections on the week. So this last email, he talked about happiness, right? And then he would highlight the positive works of those throughout the ELF team. And he would also talk about, here's progress that we're seeing in the organization towards our goal. And that's a way for the employees who may not get to see the CEO every single day to have a feeling of being connected, right? So that's one best practice. Another one is one that I've seen Haley Romer, who just stepped down as the Chief Revenue Officer for the Atlantic, and also Bill McNabb do. Bill McNabb was the Chairman and CEO of Vanguard. And what both Haley and Bill would do is, for the new employees in their organization, once or twice a month, they will have a breakfast and just sit down, just them with those new employees. And it's a way for them to, when you are breaking bread together, having a meal together, it's a very different feeling, right? And they would just use that time, that breakfast, that lunch, to get to know their new employees and have that touch point. That's so important, because you think to you are the CEO, the CMO, the CRO, but to you, you're just you. But to that employee, it's time with that person in a leadership position is a type of currency, right? And so having a sense of people feel they belong when they felt seen. So being able to spend that time, even with employees who are new, who they might not otherwise be with you, those breakfasts or lunches, and they don't take a lot of time, but they have a tremendous impact. Those are really helpful. Having a regular cadence of, town halls throughout the organization, where people can ask questions and people can really hear directly from the leaders of the organization what is happening and what the pulse of the organization is. I think that's really important, right? That's another best practice. And the final one is one I've seen effectively done by many, including Shelley Lazarus. So Shelley was the chairman, she's the chairman emeritus for Ogilvy and Mather. She is also on the board of Blackstone, and it's just World Wildlife Federation. She's just this incredible board director, incredible leader. And Shelley I remember when I visited her, she had like several different notes that she was handwriting. She was handwriting thank you notes. Those make an impact. I have one of her notes right up on my wall, right? Like you think about the time it takes for you to write a thank you note to acknowledge the good work of someone on your team. That takes you 2 minutes, but it can have a significant impact on the person who's receiving it. And we forget that. So just gratitude is a very simple thing to affect that sense of belonging.
Thank you. It's great. You put a lot of responsibility for company leaders, but I like it. I
well, that's like part of the responsibility when you take on that big role. Power.
Okay, going further from the company to teams, and obviously about teams, we normally speak about management team, teams, project teams. But less often let's company like a team, the whole team, because then the question is how many people could be in team, and again I would appreciate if you would somehow clarify whether there is somehow a gap between company like organization of many teams or many other sub-organizations and teams. Would you differentiate this or not? Because what you've said about leader and this glue, this purpose, and just this, like Japanese said, so to keep soul of a company together and something like this. This is a very great idea. But then again, coming back to the teams, a much smaller unit, whether you differentiate it or not, and how to build this, teams properly and properly organized within the big company.
Mm-hmm. So one is there's our immediate team, and we can belong to different teams in the organization, right? And on those different teams, we can play different roles. So for example, I have my Coach K Center leadership team that includes my assistant director, a faculty director, the faculty advisor for our center fellows. And then we also have 40 MBA, second year MBA students that are also part of the team, right? I would say there's my immediate team. That's the administration that carries across from year to year. But then there's also our center leadership fellow MBA team that are part of our larger team that are, after this year, they graduate and we have another group coming in. So there can be teams, different types of teams based on the duration that they are members of that team. And there's also, those who we're working with over the long period every day on an everyday basis. Then there's another team that I am part of that is our center, all the different centers at the business school, all the executive directors. I'm part of that team too, right? I think the way to describe, so understanding that one single person may be parts of different teams and have different roles within that team, I think it's really important. But I think of the book by General Stan McChrystal called Team of Teams. We have to think of ourselves not only as responsible for our teams, but if we're part of this larger organization, we're also responsible for we're also responsible for the success of the overall organization may mean that there might be a trade-off where we have to take a sacrifice on our immediate team for the organization moving forward. And so as the higher up we go, the more we have to take an enterprise view of the organization. So it's not just our immediate teams. We also have to look at all the other different teams and understand that we are part of those teams as well. Does that help answer your question?
Well, yeah. I mean that we differentiate nevertheless, let's say company and teams, and understandable that a particular person may belong to many teams, but I would like to bridge and to come to another questions about, let's say, team itself and this glue inside and the superpowers of every person of a team, and not to pay attention to individual performance, but to performance of a team would immediately raise a lot of other consequences and questions. In particular, if person belongs to many teams, what about his or her superpower or powers? Should we speak about many powers? Does it fit, if it is just one, to any kind of position, any other teams or not? And could we somehow manage this or not? In this respect, and whether, and also a question from the audience, are we aware about superpower, or only leaders should define, do we have it or not somehow? Because it's quite an important, and as far as I could gather, one of the key points in your ideas, which I like, which is very, very, very attractive. But then comes the practical questions about, creating, managing, building, changing teams. These are quite normal, let's say, everyday practice of leaders of the company. Do they care that teams will be?
I love these questions because they're helping me to clarify my thinking. So thank you so much for asking them. So no, this is wonderful. All right. So what I'm hearing, I'm hearing is the question around, well, on different teams, do we bring out different superpowers and so forth? So let me step back and give an example or two of a superpower. So one on the emotional glue, that's a type of superpower that, regardless of what teams you're on, when you have that sort of superpower and you can get people connected so that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, that's a great superpower on any team. So someone who has that sort of superpower is my friend Shane Battier. Shane is he's a two-time national basketball champion, amazing basketball player. And a few years ago, Michael Lewis, who wrote Moneyball, did a study on Shane, and he said Shane's individual statistics are not spectacular, not any more spectacular than any of that of his teammates. However, when Shane is on the court, the entire team does a whole lot better than when he is on the bench. Isn't that interesting? Somehow by Shane being in the moment with the team just does a lot better. Now I can attribute that Shane does have that superpower of being an emotional glue for the team, but he also does that because he's an incredible communicator. He also can feel like he has both the IQ and also the emotional intelligence to be able to understand where people are at their different moments. That's powerful, right? Another superpower, if we look at Coach K, I think Coach K, regardless of what profession he is in, and he just happens to be in the coaching basketball profession, he would be extraordinary in that profession, regardless of what profession he is in. And people would say, well, he's a coach. Isn't that his superpower? I would say, no, there's amazing coaches. You look at someone like Dean Smith of UNC, but they both drew on different superpowers. Coaching is just the achievement that they express their superpowers in. Two of Coach K's superpowers are, one, he knows how to manage the emotional energies of the teammates. Like he knows how to get them excited. He knows like when they're feeling down, he can pump them up, right? And then the other superpower that he has is this ability to use language in a way that clarifies. So for example, in the United States during COVID, at the start of COVID, when there was a lot of debate around mask wearing, Coach K went on public and he said, you know what? We wear uniforms. When we are on a sports team, we wear uniforms. When you're in the military, because he has a military background, in the military, we wear uniforms. And today, when you see someone wear a mask, that's our uniform. And you can say, when you see someone wear a mask, say, hey, teammate. His ability to use language in that way is among his superpowers. So those are types of superpowers that would make any team amazing, right? But part of it is understanding that. Now, there's also functional superpowers. For example, some people have a gift for putting together slide decks. I have a former student, when he puts together a slide deck, you just want to, they're so emotional. They're the type of slide decks that make you cry and they make you weep. And he's just amazing. There are some teams that won't have a use for that capability or that superpowers, and that's okay. And that's okay. I think we all have a range, but it's knowing the context that we're in is so important, and knowing which superpowers to bring out when. But then there's some, I think a lot of the relationship superpowers, those are especially needed today. And those are ones that would serve any team, right? Does that help answer the question?
Well, there are more questions than possible to answer during 1 hour. So it's fine. It's okay. I'm just trying to ask more questions.
Please keep sending them to me, because I have this.
I'm transferring. You in one of the talks you mentioned that superpower is innate somehow, and this creates a special also attitude, whether you could develop it or not could develop, and then what is the difference, if any, between, let's say, superpower and in this respect and merit? Would you differentiate this or not?
Yeah, this is something where I have to dive a lot more into, because I'm trying to clarify myself in this work. So I would say innate or instinctive. Mm-hmm. Innate is something where you have a natural propensity for it, and you're just, you keep getting better and better at it. But it just, some people, like, we know those people. I'll talk about innate superpower in sports. LeBron James, the way he can, shoot those baskets, that's innate, and then he's cultivating it more and more. But there's also instinctive, where through years and years and years of practice, you start having building an instinct for it, right? So in that sense, it can also be cultivated through lots and lots and lots of practice. I think about, I'll share 2 stories with you when I think about this idea of innate and how I was thinking about it. So one time I was listening to the pianist Emanuel X in an interview. He was at Duke, and someone asked him, how did you pick the piano? He's one of the greatest piano players in the entire world. And he said, well, when we moved into our apartment when I was age 7, the previous tenants left their piano for us. So he started learning how to play the piano. And I thought, wow, that's serendipitous. If those tenants hadn't left him that piano, could it be possible that we might not never had Emanuel X as one of the world's greatest piano players? And so I was thinking through that. And around the same time, I was talking to my friend, Bob Lefkowitz. Bob is a Nobel laureate in chemistry in 2012. And when Bob first opened up his laboratory at Duke, he took the first 4 people who walked in through the door. He didn't choose them. They just, they said, we would like to work for your laboratory. He said, that's great, you're in. All 4 of those became great scientists. And it just made me wonder, was that serendipity, or was there something that Bob did that really helped them hone their particular, the particular aspect of what they're able to do really well in application in the context of the science, right? And so I think this idea of superpowers, there's an innate capability for it, but there's also something that can be honed, where the more it's instinctively built up over time. Now, there's also superpowers where I'm 5'1". I mean, I'm really short. I can practice and practice and practice at basketball, and it will never become instinctive for me to be a great basketball player, right?
But you can enjoy it.
I can enjoy it. Yeah, I know. And I'm so glad you raised that point about enjoying. My friend Katie Taylor, she is the former CEO of the Four Seasons. She once told me, you can't be great at something you're not passionate about. So part of superpowers is it's also something you could love doing that energizes you. That's a differentiator between a strength and a superpower. I can do Excel spreadsheets. I do not get excited or happy about doing Excel spreadsheets. That's a strength. But I get really excited when I'm talking to people and like bouncing around ideas like this.
Okay. Let me come further deeper. Let's say individual in the team, in the organization. What's your attitude towards KPI, performance reviews, and all other tools which are widely spread and widely used within many organizations worldwide?
I think they are needed. I think structure, it's not an either or. It's like management or leadership. We need both, right? Management is different than leadership, but we need both. Structure enables the scaling of things. So I believe KPIs and OKRs, those are structured, and structure creates a type of clarification of what the goals are, what we're aiming for, and that clarification actually creates a lovely sense of psychological security because you know what's expected of you. But I think those alone, they're necessary but insufficient. We also need these human factors, human dynamics of really seeing each other, the emotional energies, the emotional courage. That's what can make those fly, So I think they're necessary but insufficient, just as, you can have all the emotional like superpowers in the world, but in the absence of a structure, you can't scale. You need both.
Okay, so we structured the teamwork within different performance indicators and somehow which then built above them, let's say, remuneration system, etc., etc. This will immediately lead to competition inside the team and certain kind of a disagreements about that or another, let's say, approaches within the team. And so we will immediately face this question about let's say good teams and competition within the team and how to resolve sometimes hard and harsh discussions.
Oh, I love that topic because that brings it back to belonging and rechanneling competitive energies, right, and superpowers. So a lot of times when we have high achievers on the team, naturally there's competition and there's comparison trapping. I have 3 children who I love very much, and their tendency is to compare. But what I've discovered as a parent, as a mom, is when I help them see what each one of them is really, what their spectacular, remarkable, differentiating contributions are, it tamps down that it rechannels that competitive energy into supporting each other. I learned this from Coach K. So Coach K, he's not only highlighting the players who are making the most points when they're on the court, he's also highlighting the assists and the players like Justin Robinson. He made Justin Robinson a co-team captain because Justin is able to manage the emotional energies of the team, and he recognizes that as a superpower. And he was like, Justin, this is what you're amazing at, And so part of it, our role as a leader, competition within the team is not, jealous competition is not good. A way of tamping that down is to be able to take the time to know each one of your teammates. And you're in the leadership role to be able to help them see what their differentiating contributions are, like what they bring to the table. That's helping them be seen. And that's also a sense of belonging, right? Now, the other thing that goes back to the KPIs and OKRs is clarity. When you have clarity of the objective and then clarity of roles, like, you know what, we can discuss in this meeting this particular decision, but the person who is the ultimate decision maker on this decision is John over here. There's clarity, right? And then you can discuss, John has the decision on that because John, it's a marketing decision and John is the chief marketing officer. Another decision is a finance decision. The entire executive leadership team you want healthy debates, but you have clarity that at the end of the day, the decision on finance goes to Jane because Jane is CFO, right? So now Jane can solicit that sort of feedback and have the security solicit that feedback, but at the end of the day, the decision rests with her. Right? And so when you have clarity on who has what decision, who owns what decision, that can, and then when a meeting, the purpose of a meeting is for debate and discussion, or is a purpose for that particular meeting after the debate and discussion is done is to say, oh, this is what the decision is. This is how we're going to communicate it out to the rest of the organization. Everyone falls in line then.
Great. It is very nice talking to you, and you particularly touched one of the questions which I typically ask at the very end about the personal life, and you mentioned about your kids, and we have still a few minutes. Do you use this approach somehow in the family?
Oh, I am so happy you asked that question, because one of the insights, so I'm working on, there's a book on superpowers, and actually, let's see if I can share it out on, I have a newsletter that comes out twice a month. And so if I can share that out with the group afterwards, that would be great. Yep. But the other idea I've been playing around with for a long time is this idea of parenting as an act of leadership. So my greatest leadership lessons come when I became a mom, because I realized very quickly positional power means nothing to a 5-year-old. It doesn't mean a lot to a millennial or a Gen Z today either. And this idea of, parenting is a giving up of control in certain ways, right? Because we're dealing with uncertainties, their likes and dislikes may change. And so I use the leadership principles. I learned a lot of leadership principles from just the engagement with my children. So with the superpowers, my hope is my children, they will support each other, they will love each other and not compete against each other. And so I have been using the superpowers and highlighting, and even this idea of like having them, when they're fighting and mad, having them stop and saying, okay, they have to say to each other, I love you because, and fill in the blank. That breaks the cycle and changes, and creates more of that harmony and cohesion. So yes, and I think if we allow it, parenting can be one of our most powerful personal leadership development tools if we are intentional about it.
Great. Once again, thank you very much. It was an honor and privilege for me to host you, and thank you for joining ReinforceUA project. And for all the participants, I'd like to remind that this event was recorded, and you may share the record and see it further on to understand and to think about superpower and which kind of superhero you are particularly. And if you are a leader of a company, please learn from today's thoughts how to manage company and to keep the company belonging together or glued together. What is left is for me is just to remind you that the ReinforceUA project is on full pace, and we shall meet next Wednesday at 6 p.m. Kyiv time to meet Dr. Ruth Gotian, the Chief Leading Officer and Assistant Professor of Education and Anesthesiology, but her research is about mindset and skill set of peak performers. So performers, individual performers within the team. And she will be accompanied with a real astronaut, Dr. Charles Kamada, who actually flew with shuttle Discovery on 2005, just following the mission, the tragedy of Columbia. And of course, his view, both as an astronaut and as an engineer, as a team leader within NASA organization, would be very valuable for our participants. So please check your calendars next Wednesday, September 14th, 6 p.m. Kyiv time. And once again, Professor Shin, thank you very much for joining. Wish you and all the best, and look forward to this bright and nice future when all companies all over the world and all leaders will be sharing the ideas you have just presented. Thank you very much.
The war in Ukraine has changed the world, and now we need to think about where this world is moving to, together. That's why MIM Business School is launching the nationwide educational project ReinforceUA, where the world's greatest minds will share their ideas and insights. And you will get their experience, change your perspective, and discover what changes should the business be ready for, before and after the victory. Every week on ReinforceUA.com.